right, you guys, welcome. Happy to have everybody here. I'm not sure if people will join, but I don't know if we've had the conversation yet, but this is kind of intended to be just something that you can participate in if you're available, but it's also something that's going to be recorded and available to you later. So if as we'll add people as they kind of join on, and it seems like everybody here has used Zoom before, so there's not really any instruction to kind of go through. There's the chat if you want to chat, or just unmute yourself and say some words if you want to. So really, this is the first time that we're doing the virtual class for the new wine club, which is super exciting, just because it allows us to kind of see each other without being with each other, which, you know, COVID and all is a good thing. So you can kind of see the agenda here on the screen. There's a couple of housekeeping things that I want to talk about as it pertains to wine club and how to access the video and the text sheet. So in the box that you received should be something that, let me go over here. If you did the three wines, not all red, but the mix, you should have 3 text sheets that came in your box, and in the bottom corner is a QR code that came with each printout. If you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to the Vinovium website, where there is a digital copy of this, also with the video that we're creating today. So essentially what's going to happen is we're going to do this class, and then I'm going to take apart the sections about Viognier and the Ocotillo and the Cab Franc, and then those video portions will live independently according to the wine on the website. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen with you. That way you know how to access that, just in case you throw these away, which if you do, recycle them. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen, and then we'll kind of jump into topics that we're going to talk about and follow the agenda. But before we do that, I want to make sure you understand how to get to the information about the wine. And everyone, you know, there's been a lot of comments about the website. The website eventually will be changing to better reflect kind of where Vinovium is and where it's going. Hopefully you can see my screen at the moment. I'm going to pull up a website, pull up Vinovium. Okay, so what I did just temporarily until we figure out the best place for this to live is, if you, either way, whether you go to wines, there's now a new drop down for wines called wine releases, or if you get to it from the wines here in the main navigation bar and you click on that, it'll say wine releases. And here are basically the 3 wines that we're talking about today. And the video, like I'm saying, the video coming soon will be based off of the video that we're creating today. So that video will live here based off of that topic that we're going to talk about. So if you click on download text sheet, it'll basically take you to the exact same thing that you got in your shipment. And then you could download that, whatever you want to do. You could share it, whatever. So that'll live forever on the website, and then we'll kind of just add on as we go through the years here. And then the other thing I was going to say is, let's say you go to wines and you don't go to wine releases. Eventually what's going to end up happening is all the wines that are currently on the website will have the same information. So if you go to the product page for each individual wine, that information will eventually also live on this page, or there'll be a link to that information. So you should be able to get to the text sheet information for every release going forward from the individual product page or from the wine release page. And the wine release page, again, is wines, wine releases, super simple. All right, you guys, so we're going to go through 3 wines. I sent out an email, obviously, with the login information and to kind of get into the Zoom meeting, but part of that email was also kind of what's the expectation for these virtual classes. It's not fair for us to ask you to open every single wine that we release for these classes. And I know that when COVID round 1 happened, that a lot of the wineries were doing virtual classes and virtual tastings, and they would send you 3, 4, 5 wines. And the expectation was to open all those wines to participate in the tasting. I don't expect you to do that. Even if you don't want to drink the wines, this is really meant to create content that can be accessed in the future. If you want to open all 3 wines, fantastic. We're going to taste all 3 wines, or at least I'm going to walk you through my tasting of all 3 wines. We're going to talk about kind of the context behind each wine. But really, it's not intended for you to, unless you want to, again, open all 3 wines just because we're doing a virtual class. So that being said, if you are drinking wines today, or one of the wines that came in the shipment, we may all be drinking different wines. I'm going to start with the Viognier. Feel free to join me if that wine is open for you. If not, just open something, drink something, even if it's Scotch, because if I weren't doing this, I'd probably be drinking Scotch also. All right, and let's go ahead and start. So we have an agenda for the day. I did want to welcome everybody. There is an introduction about Viognier. We'll do a little background on Viognier, kind of the history of Viognier, the lineage of Viognier, kind of varietal characteristics. We'll talk about High Cross Vineyard specifically, which is where this Viognier comes from. Erica and Cam Campbell are the owners of High Cross Vineyard, and they tried to join us today, but they're unable because they are harvesting this Viognier that we're drinking tonight, so that we can press it tomorrow. And I'll be actually going over to West Cape Cellars tomorrow to press Viognier. And obviously, if you hear Nacho in the background, it's because he insists on being a part of every single class that I do. And I apologize. He has his moments of being hangry, and I think this may be one of the moments. So then we'll actually talk about to kind of follow up or finish the Viognier section. We'll look. When I was in Condrieu, the Northern Rhone, several years back, 2016, which I miss so dearly. We'll look at a video that I created that is kind of so you can see the terrain and the topography of where the home of Viognier comes from. And then we'll do an introduction about Ocotillo, like why the name Ocotillo, what's the history of that brand, kind of what's the makeup of the brand of the wine in the 2018 vintage, and really what's the style of wine based off of, which is this idea of a Super Tuscan, and what's the history behind Super Tuscan. And then we'll finish with the Cabernet Franc. Obviously, this is a non-Texas wine, so it's important for us to talk about why we produce non-Texas wines, and also kind of from there, we'll talk about the varietal characteristics, the winery partnership that we have in Lodi to produce this wine. And then we'll finish with a little bit of Q&A if you have any questions. And then we'll talk about the next round of public virtual classes with Mark Rayshap. And I did an interview with him yesterday, and I'll show you that video so you can meet Mark. And then we'll talk about the classes that we're going to be featuring in the next 3 classes, virtual wine classes, starting in August. Okay, so we're going to go to Ocotillo, and in terms of tasting order, this would be the correct tasting order, go from the Viognier to the Sangiovese-based wine. This is actually Sangiovese and Merlot. And kind of, let me put up the agenda so we kind of stay on track here. The history of the name and wine, and then kind of tasting notes with production. Okay, so 2012, and probably Craig tells this story better than I, but I'll give it a whirl. Those of you that know, we started the winery in 2012. That was kind of the first hoorah into the wine industry that we had. We were technically not permitted then, and 2013 was the very first vintage that we actually produced wine under our permit. But in 2012, what we ended up doing is we kind of consolidated a group of 7 wineries to keg wines for us that we went out and sold. And one of those wines was a wine that we called Ocotillo that William Chris produced. And if you don't know what an Ocotillo is, here's what an Ocotillo looks like. Ocotillo is it's a cactus-like plant that can grow 6, 7, 8 feet tall, has really pretty red flowers on the end, drought resistant. It's just kind of I don't know, the imagery of it was pretty but sturdy and kind of rustic, and somehow that worked for the name of the wine. So 2012, William Chris made a wine that they had called, I think it was called Highwire, and it was a Primitivo Sangiovese blend, or a Primitivo. Craig, I can't remember, if you know, chime in. But I think it was Sangiovese Primitivo blend, and that wine was actually originally put in a keg that was very different than the keg that we use today, in the sense that it was kind of the first generation keg, which was a big 360-degree ball, and that ball sat in a cardboard box and took up the footprint that was probably twice the size of the current keg, and therefore really impossible to sell. and so we had to do something with this wine, and we ended up dumping the kegs and bottling the wine as the 2012 vintage of Ocotillo. And I called that my chips and salsa wine. and it was just because it was, I don't know, it wasn't my favorite wine. Anyway, so we kind of let the brand go. We didn't really know, as we've kind of evolved the winery, we've kind of created kind of core brands and core wines for us. It first started with the Lot 83. Lot 83, as many of you know, is another Sangiovese-based wine, but that wine tends to be kind of the more Chianti style of wine, a little bit more savory, higher acid, more food-friendly, not as much oak, not as much fruit intensity, not as full-bodied. And then we thought, well, let's create the kind of the bigger brother of that wine, which would be the Super Tuscan. And the Super Tuscan, we said, well, that kind of fits the Ocotillo brand. Let's make that kind of fall into that style of wine. And so 2017 was the reintroduction of Ocotillo. That was a Sangiovese Tannat blend, 100% Nara vineyard from the Texas High Plains. And we've kind of kept the collaboration with William Chris. So this vintage, the 2018 vintage of Ocotillo, is a 50% Sangiovese, 50% Merlot blend, 100% Texas High Plains from two different vineyards. The Sangiovese comes from a vineyard called Phillips Vineyard, and Tony and Madonna Phillips are the people who produce this fruit. And on the next release that will happen in September will be the 100% Sangiovese and the 100% Merlot, and we will actually bring onto the class both of these people from these vineyards. That way we can meet them and kind of greet them and hear their take on their story of their vineyard. So I didn't want to spend too much time on the individual varietals because we're going to do that in September. But the blend, the Merlot part is 50% coming from another High Plains vineyard called Paca Vineyard, and Kumar Paca is the viticulturalist here at that vineyard. And in terms of how the wine was produced, each varietal was harvested kind of in mid to late August going into early September. The Merlot was actually harvested in early September. And then they were fermented separately in a large 1,300-liter oak cask. So there is a little bit of oak influence from the actual fermentation forward. When you talk about fermenting an oak cask, it's not so much about the oak. It's more about the oxidation that the oak provides. It allows more oxygen into the fermentation, and you get a little bit more robust fruitiness, a little bit more robust intensity of character and flavor, and it just creates a little bit more of a richness to the wine that you otherwise wouldn't get. The wines after their primary fermentation were then aged both 20 months in barrel. However, the Merlot was aged 20 months in 90% new French oak, and then the Sangiovese was aged 100% in neutral oak for 20 months. So when we talk about Sangiovese, if you're drinking this wine, obviously sip on it, taste it, drink it, enjoy it. Sangiovese is one of these varietals that is both high in acid, high in tannin, and tends to have a pretty pronounced bitterness to it. In terms of its aromatic profile, it's a little bit wild and gamey and savory. While there's fruit there, the fruit is always in the back seat, if not the trunk of the car, as I would call it. It's always secondary or tertiary to kind of these savory characters. And so what we're looking for with the Ocotillo is a fuller expression of Sangiovese, a bigger wine, more tannin, more alcohol, bigger fruit, a wine that has some ageability to it. And if those of you that remember the 2017 vintage of Ocotillo, it was a wine that was super popular, and I think it was the wine that we sold out of the soonest compared to every other wine. It was kind of a win for us, and we're excited to have this vintage just because 2018, like 2017, is a really incredible year for Texas wines. 2019, tough year. Who knows what the hell is going to happen in 2020? I don't know who's producing wine in 2020. I know there's fruit available. I don't know who can afford it.
Tough year.
Definitely a tough year. Okay, so if you're tasting this wine, in terms of color, it's obviously dark. It's almost opaque. You can't really see anything through it. Classic colors for Italian-style wines is really everything to the right of a ruby cherry. You're kind of looking for kind of brown character, terracotta, tile, brick. There's a little bit of a browning character to this wine. That's 100% from the Sangiovese. The Merlot is a little bit more cherry, a little bit more red violet. And so the combination of the two kind of lend itself to kind of an overall, I don't know, kind of a muted purple, dark cherry, almost going to a garnet character. When you smell this wine, the things that you should be paying attention to are really kind of the rusticity of the wine. The Merlot is going to bring out fruit, but the overall character should be the Sangiovese. The Sangiovese definitely dominates this wine along with the oak, which is why the wine really gels well together for what we define as a unique expression of Ocotillo in this particular vintage. It's just super clean. It's got like fresh leather, clean leather, almost a new car smell. The kind of the meaty Sangiovese with the over-the-top cherry fruitiness just kind of complements very well. It's almost like you had like a thick-cut pork chop and you put like a cranberry glaze on it, or even like an applesauce glaze to it, or something minty, almost eucalyptus-like. So in terms of the overall style of the wine, once you give it a taste, it's medium full-bodied. It's got prominent tannin. It's got really high acid. The fruit is definitely in the back seat. The tannins linger. The finish lingers. It's completely savory, well-balanced, and kind of a complete wine. I say complete wine because at some point, if you keep drinking this wine, you're going to get hungry. This is not really a wine that you want to sit on your patio and just drink. I mean, obviously you could, but it's a wine that needs cheeses, it needs meats, it needs a meal to really kind of make it complete. And while there's enough fruitiness there to keep it interesting and approachable in its youth, there's still a lot of things there that need food. And I think as this wine ages, it'll turn really pretty. One of the questions we get all the time is how long will wines age in a growler? Obviously, we want you to empty the growler and come back and refill it. But at the same time, let's be realists that we want you to be able to enjoy the wines when they're ready to be drunk. If you were to ask me how long I can keep this wine in a growler, I would say easily 6 months to a year. None of the wines that we produce for the keg program are really wines that are meant for long-term aging. But at the same time, when you fill a growler here, we fill it to the top. There is no oxygen that gets into that wine. In reality, we've had growlers that last several years before they are consumed. But the reality at the same time is we're not producing these wines for long-term aging. If I was producing this wine for more long-term aging, I would probably put less Merlot in it, a significant amount more Sangiovese. That way and also I would put a cork in that growler as opposed to just the swing top. So you have time, just you don't have forever. Okay, and then Don's question is, what's the difference between new and neutral oak? Okay, when we talk about oak aging, there's two things that happen. One, we get the influence of oak, and we get the oxidation effect of oak. Oak is a container that breathes, and so when we talk about oak aging, we have to consider those two characteristics. When we talk about neutral oak, Neutral oak then loses the character, the oak flavor and the oak character from oak, and now we just have the container itself. And so when we talk about oaky flavors, this wine definitely has oaky flavors, but we also get the oxidation of oak, which is kind of a richness of fruit. It's almost like an overripe character of fruit. And part of that is the climate, but part of that is the oxidation that brought that character out. And so when we talk about neutral oak, we typically talk about oak that is more than twice used, and then it becomes neutral, regardless of American oak or French oak or Hungarian oak or Slovenian oak. It doesn't really matter. Okay. So a couple of things that we wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about the history of this style of wine, the Super Tuscan style. Before I do that, let me drop this. I did pull up the, this is the Wine Folly representation of Sangiovese. You can kind of see what they recommend in terms of its overall style. But the reality is it's a varietal that has high acid, high tannin, high bitterness. It tends to be all pretty high here. In terms of its fruitiness, it's pretty low. Classic flavors, cherry. I'm not really sure what that says there. My screen is too far away. But you kind of get the idea. A lot of herbal character, a lot of cherry character, rustic, savory, meaty, almost like you walked into a petting zoo. Carpaccio is like the classic pairing. Well, technically the classic pairing is medium rare bone-in ribeye, and wilted spinach is the classic pairing for Sangiovese. And liver and fava beans. For those of you animals out there. And then Merlot. Merlot is always fruity. That's its nature. And you can kind of see its breakdown. It's got good fruit, good body, moderate acid, moderate tannin. But it always tends to be the fruity one in the bunch. And so it's a matter of how much fruity are we looking for. This Sangiovese you'll taste by itself next in September. And then we'll do the blending trial. You'll get 100% Sangiovese, 100% Merlot. And then we'll do the blending trial to recreate the Ocotillo. And you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of the intensity of that Sangiovese is super rustic, super bold, and really quite a pleasant wine on its own that will blend to create the Ocotillo. Nacho wants to participate as always. Okay, so we call this Super Tuscan. Why do we call it a Super Tuscan? There's history here, and part of that history is both marketing and reality. And when we talk about French varietals coming into Italy, that's not necessarily an old thing. The first occurrence of French varietals coming into Italy was really in the 1700s, but it wouldn't be until the 20th century where this becomes a very prominent fixture within the region of Tuscany. And so we talk about Tuscany, we're talking about Central Italy, we're talking about Central Italy on the Mediterranean, we're talking about regions that have a pretty significant Mediterranean climate, which means you don't have extremes in your fall and your summer and your winter and your spring. You tend to get a pretty medium climate. You're on the ocean, so you have mitigating effects of the ocean. And as a result, you produce wines that are very fresh because they get cool air in the evening off the ocean, and then they get ripeness and savoriness because of heat in the growing season. When we talk about Super Tuscans really means kind of two things, or one of two things. It really means producing a wine in what is known as the international style. One of two things. One, you're producing native varietals, indigenous varietals with French technique, or you're producing French varietals with French technique, not in France. And to kind of reiterate this point, what we mean by French technique is this idea of we have this idea of monoculture. which is this idea of planting a specific varietal in a specific place to better ripen that varietal. And we also mean this idea of the use of barrique, or 225 or 228 liter French oak barrels versus any type of other oak barrel. So indigenous varietals with French technique, or French varietals not in France using French technique. And really this has become known as the international style, but it's Italy that really kind of created this in the first place. And the term Super Tuscan is strictly a marketing term that was created by Decanter Magazine in the 1970s that has kind of just stuck ever since. And what we end up seeing is every region around the world, and even in the New World and in the Old World, are producing these super wines where we hyper focus on the varietal in terms of where they're planted and how they grow, and then in terms of how they're produced in the winery, which is the use of really new French oak. And the reason why that's French technique is because when you look at the two main regions in France that are the most popular, Burgundy and Bordeaux, 100% new French oak 100% of the time for both reds and whites. And so that by far has become kind of a regional style that is unique to France. So Super Tuscans is a thing that was created in France, or excuse me, created in Italy, that has kind of propagated itself all around the world. We see it throughout central Italy. We see it around the world. The fact that we're growing Pinot Noir in Germany, a French grape in Germany, is a direct byproduct of Super Tuscan. We see the same thing everywhere else in the world, in every region. I'm happy to be able to finally do this first virtual class with the Wine Club. I think it's going to grow. Ever since we launched the new Wine Club, we've had nothing but really positive feedback from everybody in terms of the quality of the club, the value of the club, and the idea of creating more educational opportunities for people. So it's exciting to be able to introduce not only new classes, but also new educators and new personalities to the family that we call the Vonovia membership. And we hope that it continues, and we hope that you're having a good time and that you share it with people. There's no reason why you can't drink 3 wines with your buddies. You just need to invite them over, or I can invite them over for you, and you may not know them. So, guys, I really appreciate your time today. Look forward to segments of this being on the website. If you missed any of Julia's classes, all those classes are currently on YouTube, except for the first class where we had some technical difficulties. But the wines on the Shades of Rosé class, the wines on the Republic of Georgia are all on there. And to kind of summarize kind of where we are today with the business, you guys are more than welcome to come here. We do have spots on the deck where you can be that are on non-permanent property. If you need to use the restroom when you come in here, you're more than welcome to use the restroom. But right now, TABC does not want us serving any of the cocktails or by the glass. However, you can buy the bottle and hang out on the non-permanent portions of the property. And we're trying to figure out how to make more non-permanent property possible on the deck and possibly inside. And then if you haven't heard, the Friday meals have been doing really quite well, where every Friday we're offering a different meal that comes with wine that you can either pick up or hang out and picnic with. Alrighty. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank y'all so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see y'all soon. Ciao.